My name is Jennifer Koval, and I am an association program educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Saratoga County. My background is in sustainable systems with a focus on permaculture design, and I have had the pleasure of having my own homesteading acreage for about 20 years in Saratoga County. And so perennial vegetables are a particular interest of mine. So I thought I would share some with you. I do not have a botany background, but I have a overall gardening interest, and I'll share some of my favorite perennial vegetables that you can grow in our area. Perennial vegetable gardening is part of edible landscaping philosophy, and that edible landscaping is a term that just describes when you incorporate plants that you can use for food within your own traditional landscape plantings, or specifically within a vegetable garden. But it tends to focus more on substituting edible plants for traditional landscape plantings. Permaculture has been covered in another video series by Jessica Holmes, and she did a really good explanation of some permaculture concepts and ways to design your homestead. No-till gardening is another technique that falls under permaculture and some other agriculture techniques, but that works very well when you're incorporating edible perennials, obviously, because you don't want to be tilling them up each year. The only rule that I'd like to stress is about safety, so that you're properly identifying your plants and not confusing, say, for example, a daylily with an Asiatic lily, because only one of them is edible and they're totally different plant families. That's just one example. And then, just if anything volunteers in your garden, you just want to make sure that that particular plant that's considered a weed but might also be edible is edible, and that you're not accidentally consuming something else. I'd like to cover just the basic difference between an annual, a biennial, and an herbaceous perennial in this talk, and talk about advantages and disadvantages of growing perennial vegetables. Talk a little bit about the objectives about why you would be planting perennial vegetables, and then also why you can use them in your garden design, and just my examples of about a dozen that I grow. This is not my garden, but I would love it to be, although it looks like it's there's a lot of work happening in that garden, and it's pretty formal, which is one way to go. There's a couple spirals in there, I think, and it's just beautiful, well laid out garden. But anyway, annuals are plants that complete their life cycle in one season. In the Northeast, we often treat tender perennials as annuals, but they're actually perennials in other zones. Biennials take 2 years to complete their life cycle, and then some of them we also treat as annuals. But they actually, a lot of our vegetables don't set seed till the second year and then they die, but we only use them that first season. And then herbaceous perennials die back to the ground each fall, usually after a hard frost, or even a little later than that. And then they return each spring, and they live for many years in general. There are, I believe, more advantages than disadvantages to growing perennial vegetables, but I'm just going to show you a few of those. An advantage is that when you plant perennial vegetables in your garden, you're creating a polyculture in general. Talking about a polyculture is a diverse grouping of plants, oftentimes starting with like the tree layer and then down to shrubs, perennials, and annuals. The reason that works so well with perennial vegetables is that they do occupy a layer within the garden that you don't normally see when you're just talking about annuals, and they're beneficial for the niche that they occupy, and they also tend to promote a more resilient garden. They're in the wintertime, they might be holding the soil where bare soil tends to erode or get compacted. Perennials help preserve the soil structure. They balance nutrient needs possibly with attracting beneficial insects and resisting pests. Perennial vegetables help with food security within your homestead. They are reliable in general. They might even be prolific so that you have extra food to give away, or just lower maintenance food that you can gather when you might need it. You save money. They also fill the gaps in the garden production calendar. So in the early spring, when not much else is ready to harvest, perennial vegetables are ready. There are other ones that are ready in the fall. Some challenges involve where you decide to place your perennial vegetables. You don't want to put them somewhere where you have to get in and till. You know, if they're in the way, it's going to be harder to access those annual areas that you want to till. My solution for that is to do sheet mulching and forgo the tillage and do no-till in my vegetable beds. You know, it tends to, sometimes that can be a problem if you have a buildup of certain weeds, but mulching usually takes care of that for me. Some perennial crops can actually become a little bit aggressive and crowd out other desirable plants. That's something to keep in mind. You may have to, you know, aggressively harvest or divide and give away or mulch some areas where you have too many. Once you plant, they can be hard to move. There are certain perennial vegetables plants that they're either hard to move because if you leave a little bit behind, you're going to have them still coming back in that place, and they can also have some difficulty reestablishing. Weed pressure, I mentioned already, can build up in areas that are not tilled every year, but I think with sheet mulching, you can avoid that. When you're talking about designing any type of edible landscaping, it's helpful to utilize zones. This was mentioned in the permaculture video. You want to locate plantings that require more attention closer to the house, or zone 0, which the high maintenance plants are located in zone 1. And then ones that are harvested infrequently or need less attention or water further out. You want to consider the number of visits you have to make to certain areas in your garden and locate those frequently visited plants closer to your house. Herbs tend to be harvested fresh nightly when you're cooking them, so you should put them close to the house or along garden paths for ease of collection. Lettuces also would work well in that location. Perennial vegetables usually require less attention, so they would be fine to be put further away from the house, maybe in zone 2, and vegetables like winter squash that you just harvest all at once in the late season could fall in that category as well. Other considerations are microclimate. That would be including you want to spend some time figuring out the movement of the sun, where the windier areas in your garden might be, or wet areas, how water moves, that's the slope of your garden, and where you actually have a water supply when you need it. You want to consider accessibility. You want to locate your garden where you can get to it with a wheelbarrow or a small tractor, possibly locating it near a source of animal manure like chicken coop, and just also be aware that chickens can do some damage to your garden, and so you want to probably fence them out or fence your garden in and let them in selectively at certain times. If you don't have access to a designated garden area, you can also incorporate most of these vegetables into existing landscape beds. Some are also substituted for common perennials because they're all pretty to look at and they might have a flower that is unique, or they are common decorative perennials that are surprisingly edible. And we'll talk about a couple examples of that shortly. This is a picture of my garden. It's about 20 years old. Let me see if I can show you where some things are here. So this is my rhubarb bed here. And this area that not much is growing, it looks like there's some stalks on the ground. That's where the sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes are just starting to come up. This picture was taken about 2 weeks ago, so middle of May. Back here is a little collection of elderberry shrubs that I thought that I would be starting a nursery with and moving, and I just left them there and they're doing pretty well. Behind that is a pawpaw tree, and then I have another one. I have two more pawpaws, one in this corner and one in this corner that are very small right now. Those are the males, I believe, I planted over here, so hopefully they'll grow quickly. There's an ornamental cherry tree right here. This area has asparagus. Over here is a garlic bed coming up. And over beyond the rhubarb is horseradish. And then in my perennial gardens, I have daylilies and hostas. In this garden, I've also allowed some burdock to grow. There's some strawberries over here too. So that, and Egyptian walking onions, which you can't see very well, but they're in there. And we'll see close-ups of all of that. So this was a pasture. It didn't really take a lot of work to convert it to a garden. It was only till the first year I planted it. So it is no-till. I've treated it with composted chicken bedding. A few areas have cow manure added. Cardboard, newspaper, and wood chips are what I use to mulch with, and sometimes straw, or especially around the garlic. And I fertilize with a granular organic fertilizer. There are still some grassy weeds that happen, and it's not by any means no maintenance, but every year it seems to get a little bit easier as the perennials fill in. Perennial vegetables can fall under three main categories. One is the leafy. You're harvesting the leafy green shoots and stems, or you're harvesting tubers and roots, or you're harvesting from the onion family. So I have a few examples of each of those. The first one I want to talk about is one that I used to think was not useful at all. And I have since learned that it is a very useful plant. It's stinging nettle. And it is a member of the nettle family. This one is a widespread, I believe. Every place can have a little bit of stinging nettle. There are a couple other nettle varieties that we use too, but this is the one that's the most common. You will know it when you walk into it because it has little stinging hairs on the leaves and stems. So you basically, people do buy seed and plant this, but I have not needed to do that. I've just let a few patches spread each year. And then other areas that it comes up, I just mow it if it's in a place I don't want it to be. It does volunteer readily, and it spreads by rhizomes, and it likes to colonize disturbed soil. And it has to be harvested with gloves, and that's why I shared some pictures of a person harvesting it in a glove, because you don't want your hand to sting the whole entire day after you've harvested this plant. The sting is pretty gentle, but it's still, you can still feel it for several hours. But anyway, that is my first, and it emerges in the springtime, and that is the best time to harvest. Hosta is another plant that I have just discovered in the past couple years that's edible. I did not know it, but it's been a very popular vegetable in Asia for many years, and probably somehow it was lost in translation when it was brought here, that it is edible, and it's called the mountain vegetable in parts of Asia. It's in the asparagus family. It loves the shade. The I believe the best time to harvest, and I have eaten it this spring, is in the spring when you see the young shoots coming up. You can also eat the leaves, but this is the most tender stage, and it does have a slight asparagus flavor, and you just saute it, and at least that's how I prepared it. So, and then this picture shows all the different varieties of hosta that you could grow. It's a shade-loving plant, I think I said already. So you would want to locate that somewhere, probably other than the vegetable garden, or unless you have some shrubs or trees in a corner to shade them. Daylily is a very popular perennial that we use in our landscapes. You just want to make sure you're harvesting or planting the daylily and not the Asiatic lily. So daylilies get the name because the flower is only, the blossom is only out for one day. And most people enjoy the blossoms, but apparently you can also eat the rhizomes. But I have not done that. But yeah, just do your research, and there are a lot of different daylily varieties out there. Also partial shade loving or sun loving plant. Lavage is, the way that I equate it is that it's like a perennial celery, but it's very strong. So a little bit goes a long way, but it is a very easy plant to grow. I have a clump of it that I started from some seedlings somebody gave me years and years ago, and it just does its thing every year in the garden. And you can cut it back in the middle of the summer, and then it'll kind of come back again, so you can get a second harvest. But a little bit goes a long way. I'm not really crazy about the flavor, but I like knowing that it's available if I need it, or if I don't have celery and need some for a recipe, I can use just a little bit of that. Spiderwort is another decorative perennial plant that people use and complain that it spreads a lot. But if you have chickens, you won't have that problem because they'll eat it right down to the ground. They love it. And I've just noticed that in the past couple of years. These are my chickens here, and this is Spiderwort, and we're nibbling on it when I took that picture. So this is the flower, which is also edible. This plant is a native North American plant. And on the other side here, this is catnip. There's some violas there, and then some daylily. So everything in this picture pretty much is edible, but it's also decorative. Garden asparagus, I don't really need to talk too much about. I think it's one of the original garden vegetables. Everybody's familiar with it. It has a short season, but it is a very useful plant, and it will produce for 20 years if you treat it right, and hopefully prevent it from catching certain diseases, which I have not successfully done yet. I've had 2 beds that have kind of slowly petered out. So it does take a little work to establish, and I think it likes well-drained soil, and possibly my garden is a little bit heavier, and so it doesn't love it there. But these are the sprouts coming up. Here is a basket of harvested asparagus, which you can use, either snap off just above the ground or use a knife. Here's a full mature bed after it's been harvested. You have to let some grow each summer, and you don't want to harvest until at least the 2nd or 3rd year after you've planted it. And usually people plant it from crowns that they've bought from a nursery rather than seed. And this is just a little picture of a little bit of stuff that was going into a stir fry from my garden a couple weeks ago, and asparagus was the main highlight of that. Rhubarb is another one that people are very familiar with. It's kind of making a comeback. I think people are discovering it again. It's such a great old standby. It's a heavy feeder, but it just doesn't require a lot from you. It's just another short window harvest. You want to snap those flower heads off as they're developing so that you can let it not go to seed, but send more energy into the plant itself. It's just a wonderful plant. It's nutritious. And there's a lot of neat recipes happening now with rhubarb. Jerusalem artichoke is another one that I really enjoy in my garden. It is a little messy. This picture here shows what it looks like after sort of laying down all winter out there. These stems get really hollow, almost like twiggy. And this is before I picked them all up and put them in a little pile. But it's messy. This whole area is probably 12 by 12, and it started out with, believe it or not, some Jerusalem artichoke tubers that I bought in the grocery store in the produce section, and I threw them in the garden as an experiment, and lo and behold, they spread. They're a hardy plant. It's a perennial sunflower. Basically, it's a native plant to North America, and it's highly nutritious. Here's the tubers. It's beautiful in the fall. It's the last plant that flowers in my garden, but it does tend to lodge with high winds, and it can look a little messy. So I would suggest putting it in its own designated spot that you just want to let it go, and not have to keep it contained. If you want to contain it, just harvest, diligently every year, and then replant a few of the tubers. But it is quite hard. If I had to get rid of every Jerusalem artichoke tuber in this section, it would be quite a lot of work. But I love it. I like having it there. Burdock is something that people, think of as an annoyance, but it's actually, I consider it a gift when I see it now. I didn't used to think that way, especially with animals that can have the burrs get wadded up in their fur. I tend to not want it in our pastures where we have cows, or when we had ponies, but in the garden, I'm letting it grow, and then I will harvest it. So this is actually a biennial. It is not a perennial. So this is the early stage right here of it just coming up. This is horseradish. This is actually in my perennial vegetable garden. This is later on in the summer. This is when it's made. It actually has a pretty thistly flower, and that'll turn into the burrs that catch on everything. And a funny side note is that the inventor of Velcro studied the burdock to design the Velcro. So that's kind of an example of just how nature has these cool designs for things. Biomimicry, I guess you could call that. Here's the root harvested, and then here's the root ready to prepare. And it's kind of like a little bit starchier and tougher than a potato. It holds its shape in cooking. It has a good mild flavor. So I'm going to try to use a lot more of it this year in my cooking. Horseradish is another root perennial that is useful. I just realized, because we don't use a lot of horseradish, that I should have been digging mine every year and replanting it rather than just letting it spread, which it has done. But the older roots are pretty woody, so it's important, if you want a good crop of horseradish, to dig it in the fall. Use some from the main part of the root and then divide and replant the rest. I wouldn't say, maybe every 2 years if you don't feel like doing it every year. This is the flower that it makes. It's part of the Brassica family, so it does the name, has the radish name in there. It's probably native to southeastern Europe or Western Asia, as far as I could tell from my research, but it's naturalized here, and people have shared it, and it's probably in many old home gardens to this day because it will just live on. Egyptian walking onion is probably the first plant that I realized I could utilize almost year-round in my garden. This is a picture of one in my garden with a chicken in the background, but every part of this allium plant is useful. In the spring, you use the greens as like you would a scallion, And then after a while, they get sort of tough, and they don't cook into a soft onion anymore. And that's when I switched to using, here's another tender bit of greens. I switched to using the top sets a lot, and then believe it or not, they'll form little top sets on top of each one of these greens, and then even from there they'll grow another one, and then the whole idea is that those drop to the ground and form a new plant. But these little onions are very potent, and then you can also use these small greens in your cooking. And then in the fall you can pull up the plant itself and dry the onion bulb, and they're like a strong red onion flavor, and they do keep if you dry them properly. And then I always let most of them return to the garden, these little top sets, and that'll be next year's crop. But it's a wonderful. Some people complain that they're a little bit too much spreading. I don't find that to be a problem. They're really easy to pull if they show up somewhere where you don't want them, and then you just use those in your next recipe or give them away. I don't consider them invasive. And then we have garlic, which for many years I never really realized I could be letting some of it become a perennial. Lately I've done that. If you grow garlic, which is planted usually in the fall, you'll divide each head of garlic into all the little cloves, and you'll plant those individually and then harvest the next summer. But you inevitably don't get every bulb out of the ground, and then that becomes more like your perennial garlic plant. So here's the different ways. This is early garlic sprouting, and then this is what's called spring garlic or green garlic. So people basically pull immature garlic and sell it as another vegetable crop in the spring. And that's a really common thing for garlic growers to do, is pull some of the crop early and sell it as a green garlic plant, so that you use the whole plant in your cooking. And then once it starts to mature, it will form these scapes. This is it wants to make a new little bulbils up here in this part, but these are harvested. They're cut and harvested as another useful vegetable, and they're used a lot in stir fry, or people make pesto scape out of those. They're very crunchy. You want to cook them before you eat them. If you use them in the pesto, I still think, well, you could use them raw, but they'll be really potent. I like to cook them a little bit, just like almost as long as you'd cook a green bean. And then that's it. I have some references here that I used when I was doing my research, along with photos some from my garden and some from images on the internet. But the Edible Perennial Gardening book that I consulted is based. She's a UK English writer. Some of the plants I have never heard of that she references, but some are ones that we use in North America and the Northeast. But her philosophy is really good about the polycultures and how to let things just perennialize. And then this Designing and Maintaining Your Edible Landscape Naturally book is quite old. It pairs well with Introduction to Permaculture, the two books. The Edible Landscape book tends to get a little bit more specific about types of plants to use and cultivars, and then the Introduction to Permaculture is the basic overview of how to design permaculture homesteads or systems. And then, like I said in the beginning, if you are going to research plants, just be sure that you check multiple sources when you're deciding whether a plant is edible. Talk to someone who's grown these plants, and just make sure before you try any food that that you only taste a small quantity, because some of them will cause stomach upset. I know that some people can't tolerate Jerusalem artichoke raw because it has something in it that is upsetting to your GI system, but other people can, and that most people use it cooked. So do your own research and preparation. That's why I didn't talk a lot about how to prepare these foods because I feel like there's so much information out there. You can do your own. And a lot of them are also medicinal, and that's another whole category of research that you would need to do before you imbibe. And then, you know, don't assume any food is safe for pets. That's just not the case. Human food and pet food are different categories, and I would be very cautious about sharing any of these foods with your pets. And then just a fun Google to try is just Googling these terms. Foodscape gardens, you will find a lot of beautiful images about gardening, and then edible gardening. Those are some inspiration search words. So I really appreciate you watching my video. Thank you. If you have any questions, by all means, get in touch. My contact information is right there. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, I'd be happy to share that with you. Just reach out to me. And if you have any other questions or comments about the video, let me know. Thank you.